All right. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Let's jump in at excuse me. Let's jump in at Matthew 9, where we left off last week. Matthew 9, and this section towards the end of Matthew 9 and beginning of Matthew 10. And this is a little episode here where Jesus is challenging his disciples. Gives us a little picture of Jesus's ministry, and then some insight as we gained some insight, I should say, through Matthew's eyes into Jesus's heart with regard to what we could call the harvest, or people who as yet did not know him. Some insight into his ministry in general, his perspective on those that he is desiring to reach, then his challenge to the disciples, and on into chapter 10, and long stretch then down through chapter 10, fairly lengthy section on what his expectations of his disciples would be, and then kind of heads up to his disciples on what the reaction would be. A little bit of John 15 in here in terms of, if the world treats me this way, they're going to treat you this way as well. For example, 16 and following in Matthew 10, I send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves, so on. And all these expectations of what discipleship would mean to them, or we could say the cost of discipleship or the meaning of discipleship. So we want to glean from this less of Moses, more of the intent of the series on incarnational living, and this in terms of Acts 1:8, and working on fleshing this out a little bit in terms of less of the Moses and a little bit more of the Jesus here in terms of, what does this look like in terms of Jesus and his functioning of his ministry, and then the expectation of that transitioning to the 12, and then this would transition on into Pentecost and the life of the church, and so on moving forward. It's just interesting to observe this is all. So it's just making observations from the text and how Jesus functioned, where he applied the pressure points, that is to say, where he put the emphasis, and how all of this works. I just think it's interesting to see these things and why these things, for example, I'd submit, why these things are in place. So just a little bit of recapitulation from last week, and then bumping us forward a little bit. Reading here, it says in Matthew 9:35, Jesus was going through all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom, healing every kind of disease and every kind of sickness. So just to focus your attention there for a second, if you're staring at the verses. So you see a bunch of participles there. Bang, 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 right? Going, teaching, proclaiming, healing. Going, teaching, proclaiming, healing. And they're not all the same, even though they all look the same. They're all participles, but they're not all the same. So the first was going is the past. So in general, what Matthew is saying, this is the ongoing activity of Jesus. Ongoing activity. And when Jesus was conducting his ongoing activity, that's past tense, imperfect. He uses the imperfect tense there. What was he presently doing when he was doing that? It's all continual action, but one in the past. But what was he continually doing when he was about doing that? That is, going through all the cities and villages. He was teaching, proclaiming, that is, teaching, preaching, healing. Teaching, proclaiming, and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom. And I'd submit to you that is significant that Matthew renders it that way, the gospel of the kingdom. And that's going to be significant to further observation, because our observation will be that there's a pattern here. There's a pattern in Jesus' ministry, not to get ahead of ourselves, but these two words that we've seen before in Greek, dunamis and exousias. Dunamis being power, exousias being authority. You're going to see these two things just bumped right up against Jesus. Everywhere you go with Jesus is going to be power and authority, power and authority, power and authority, power and authority. And so that's because a demonstration of kingdom authority or kingdom power to show the superiority of who he is in relation to any other rival power, any other rival authority. There is no one superior to him, flat out, period. So it says then, and also you might just submit this. It wasn't just for the wow factor, right? Healing every kind of disease, every kind of sickness. So here's an element of compassion and mercy here as well. I think you need to see also, folded up into that without going into elaborate detail. But then seeing the people, he felt compassion for them because they were distressed and dispirited like sheep without a shepherd. So we'll get to that in a second. But then he said to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful. So here's the disparity. The harvest is plentiful, laborers are few. So that's an intentional disparity that's given there. Big, none. Big, small. Disparity. Therefore, because of that, or that being the case, in other words, beseech, very strong word there, beseech, the Lord of the harvest. So you could, say, some have translated that, well, pray the Lord of the harvest, but there is a proskuneo, there is a verb for that, but that's not the verb here. So this is a very specific verb for one who would do what? Well, what would you do if you wanted something so earnestly that you were willing to get down on your hands and knees, clasp both hands together, and shakingly and tremblingly in your voice, beg the person because you were so desperate. You were so desperate that you were just begging for this. You needed it so badly. That's the word. That's the word there. You're so desperate, right? That's not proskuneo. This is a different word altogether. So do that to the Lord of the harvest, to send out ekbalo there, send out workers into the harvest. Ekbalo, in case you wonder what that is, ekbalo, if you need clarification as to the violence of that term, out, balo, throw out workers into the harvest. Just look at 10:1. He gave them authority over unclean spirits to ekbalo, cast them out. So if you have a vision in your head about, demons and Jesus casting them out, throwing them out, that's a violent process. That's not a friendly process. Oh, please, little demons, would you just go away? This is like, you are not welcome here. Get out, be gone. You don't belong here. I promise you, Jesus was pretty severe in this regard, right? So it's like, get out. With extreme prejudice, get out. This kind of thing. So it's this idea, of, thrust out. And so, be like somebody grabbing you, by the whatever of your neck and tossing you out and saying, please do this. So, in case we don't get there, the idea would be that the Lord, so Jesus is saying to his disciples, of course, the assumption here is that, guys, we're not praying, you're not praying thinking that you're not included in this. You're praying that others would join you in this, that you're already included in this, right? Because when you come to chapter 10 and verse 1, he summons them and he sends them, right? So the idea is that they are to possess the same heart and the same desire and everything else, right? So they're already, positioned. They're already part of the team here. They're already, the ones who are, the first wave in this war. They're already the ones going out. But what he's saying here is that the harvest is, you notice the predicate there, the harvest is plentiful. I mean, isn't that something back then? If someone were to say, hey, look, this is John, John chapter 4. Look on the fields, for they are white already to harvest. So he's already saying there's a harvest out there. There just aren't enough workers. I've got you guys. I'm grateful for you, is what Jesus is saying. But we need more. We need more because this harvest is just plentiful. So anyway, this is the whole context of this properly understood. So a lot of this is what Matthew is saying, is how you see it. So the passage openly, as we've said just openly declares the version of Jesus's mission for which we must gain a vision for our mission, a kind of thing here. So I think just to recapitulate where we were last week kind of quickly is, one, we see the comprehensive scope of Jesus's activities in 9:35 with those participles: teaching, proclaiming, and healing. So he didn't leave a stone unturned when it came to offering the kingdom to those in need, and this meant everyone, everywhere. But mention of kingdom there isn't an allusion to something eschatological. It's an allusion to something of power and superiority. A realm, I think, has been noted often. It's the idea of a realm here, a rule and a realm. Who's in control? Who has superior authority, and that type of thing. And then we'll see, as we've seen multiple times, that the idea of exousias here with authority, all, remember Matthew 28:18-20, all exousias is given unto me in heaven and on earth, all power, which some translations says, but all authority, exousias. Jurisdiction is the realm in which you are to exercise your ministry, your rule, your domain under him. This kind of thing. I authorize you as my agents to go forth in that realm. This is specifically what's happening here. And so Jesus went through all the cities and villages. Why wouldn't he? Why wouldn't he? Because this is the parameters of his realm, and this is where he is to go and to offer himself as Savior of mankind. And the idea of having this, as we said, having this cure for a disease, which is what we're holding out to people, to whom or from whom would we ever withhold that? Or to just switch the metaphors and say, well, we have this light, and if there's a pervading darkness, and the charge is to get out there and illumine every single dark place, then we're searchlights everywhere to find those dark places. So the second, Jesus's priorities correspond to the nature of his calling, and for Mark's gospel, we can see prioritize prayer above all else. We see that in multiple places. We looked at that as far as the nature of his calling. John makes this abundantly evident in his gospel in episodes where Jesus refers to his hour and so on. And we can go through the Gospel of John, and we could note that those allusions to his hour, or my time is not yet come. And then John 17:1, when he's about ready to be put on trial, put on the cross, all those things, my hour has come, the hour for him to glorify the Father and things of this nature. And then that final hour there, making that approach to being betrayed, and all those things that we looked at in Matthew 26:36, and so on, yielding up his will to that of the Father. A third, then, Jesus' actions corresponded to the nature of his calling and the orientation of his life established through daily protracted quiet communion with the Father in prayer. And so it was that prayer life that formulated all of that, kept everything aligned. And here's someone who had no sinful opportunity to pervert any of that process, so how much more us? So there was not a place that Jesus did not go, or a person with whom Jesus did not converse, in order to impress upon humanity the need for repentance in light of the impending rule of God. And yet, now there is this finite opportunity to do so. Even so, then and yet he had not yet gone to the right hand of the Father. But even though now we know that the clock is ticking. Again, more context in terms of places where Jesus would go and so on, take into account also those with whom he would spend time. Where would this light go? What was the nature of the dark places? And we think of the synagogues, the religious crowd. We think of the tax collectors. We think of those quote unquote sinners and whatever that took into account. Truly, anyone, Jesus was willing to go and to present himself, including social outcasts, lepers, tax collectors, prostitutes, and it's just amazing. Across the entire spectrum of people where he would offer himself as the Savior of mankind, simply because of the nature of his calling and his own nature, that light seeks out dark places. Then we see how he saw individuals. These verbs, distressed and cast down, are written in this tense, perfected tense, which means they're in this abiding state. So our takeaway from that is that, like most people, they can't acknowledge their own spiritual condition. Now, many people can acknowledge their own physical condition, right? So, whether they're whatever on the whole socioeconomic scale, people could acknowledge, well, in terms of material possessions or in terms of social status, I have X amount of possessions, I have X amount of financial security, you name it, whatever. I think I'm okay as far as this goes and something, but they have no access to their own spiritual condition. They can't even begin to gauge that, right? To even understand. They may admit to a certain amount of psychological distress, relationship disorders, and any number of things like that, but to admit to some, spiritual condition, they simply wouldn't know. And so Jesus, on the other hand, has this perfect vision. Have you ever noticed how many times, and I quit counting, but I counted for a little bit, and then I forget about it. But when you're reading in the Gospels, how many times it says, "What he knew what was in them. He knew what it's like. He knew what they were thinking." And I think, why do you keep saying that? It's just like he knew what he knew what was going on. It's like he anticipated, and then he did this, or he said this, right? Because he knew what they were thinking. Like he just anticipated. It's almost like, how would you feel if Jesus walks up to you? He's like, he answers the question you had in your head. He's, boom, there it is. I wasn't thinking that, but he just says that. There, it's out there. But in this particular occasion, he isn't saying anything except to his disciples, but he's saying, do you see what I see? Are you seeing them the way I see them? Because when he saw people, and given how we see people sometimes, and you could see people that, may be doing okay, right? Really, as far as the world might think, and as far as all the metrics by which the world measures success, are doing all right, taking care of the family, job's okay, everything seems to be pretty good, everything's bumping along all right. But it's like I remember reading about Charles Finney one time, and he was sitting in his law office in North Adams, and it came along, and he just kind of heard this voice in his head, if not in his head, but whatever it was. He just said, he heard this voice, and he's sitting there, so, what you gonna do? And it's like, well, I'm gonna be as successful as I can, as an attorney. Well, then what? Well, I'm gonna get married, and then what? Well, I'm gonna settle down, live the good life. Well, then what? Have some children, and what? Well, then what? I suppose, build a house, and then what? These then what's in succession. then what? Well, I don't know. I suppose I'll retire and, live a peaceful life in retirement. Well, then what? Well, I guess like anybody else, I'll die. Then what? Right? So, it's all going to come to that point, regardless. And so how much people ever give consideration to any of these things. But here Jesus is seeing things in terms of their spiritual condition, right? And he's actually, his physiologically changed when he does. This is what's amazing, because when you see these words, these are very specific Greek terms, but distressed and cast down. So he's seeing them as shepherdless sheep, but these shepherdless sheep, as you can imagine, that's a metaphor. It's a metaphor because he's probably picking the most vulnerable animal that there is, an animal that has absolutely no defense mechanism except that it can run. But then I'm trying to recall seeing a sheep run from my days in North Wales on the pasture, staying in a B&B out there. They don't run very well, and they're not going to outrun a wolf, But the condition here is of wolves having already done their business. They've already attacked, and the sheep are just laying there as you see them. They will. That's one defense mechanism I will say that a sheep does. It will just lay there flat and motionless and play dead. That's what a sheep, it will play dead. It does that very well. It just play dead. So there it is. Laying there, bloodied, playing dead. There you go. That's how Jesus is seeing them. Just in this pitiful, hopeless state. And if it's any appeal to those disciples, it is this sense of, we got to get out there. We've got to get out there. This is what kept Jesus in this. That's why the ongoing, the indicative, the indicative and the ongoing action, where you get from verse 35. He just kept going, going. Every town, every village, every person, and every one of these activities was significant. Going to cover all places and so on. So the fifth thing, Jesus compels his disciples to follow his manner and ministry, seeking out every place and person. So the whole idea that we just mentioned a moment ago, without going into excruciating detail again, it's this whole notion of sending out, pointing to that disparity and the need. And this idea of just continually calling out to God, beseeching them, with this notion, of course, you. I just get the sense that, and this is a lifetime of listening to these types of prayers and prayer meetings. Oh Lord, if you just raise up people to go out, raise up missionaries, raise up, just as long as it's not me, kind of thing. Even though that's not what the prayer is, but but it's sort of implied. It's like there's a separate group of people out there, the people referred to here. How many missionary conferences have you been to, right? That's the prayer. We need more people that will go. But that's not the interpretation of this passage. The interpretation of the passage is that the assumption is this is all of us. This is all of us. And so we are all part of that. Probably the early Moravians had this all right, correct, in that pretty much everybody was, out there. It's sort of like the Israelis today. The Israelis today, all of their citizens are military trained, So you can draw that ring of fire, and you can open up as many fronts, and they're all ready to man the fronts. That's just how this works. And so this is a Christian army. The idea is that we're all supposed to be out there on mission and so on. All these misconceptions, right? So this is what Jesus is saying. He's saying, he's identifying a situation that there is this massive harvest and a disparity at the same time. The laborers are few. So prayer is integral to this whole process. Jesus expected then his disciples to follow the established pattern of twofold ministry. And then you see what this twofold ministry is. This is all just pure observation. That's all, just pure observation. And if you look at Luke chapter 9, and we've been over this ground somewhat before, but the same that we see identified in Matthew. You can keep your place in Matthew 9, because Matthew is going to bring it out, and then Luke is going to do the same thing. So Luke chapter 9 and 10, you have the sending out of the 12 and then the sending out of the 70, and he's expecting his disciples then to say, look, you're going to follow this same twofold. So Jesus had a twofold ministry, two-pronged. And what was it? Healing and demon expulsion. That's what I call it. You can call it casting out demons. That's just too many words to say. So demon expulsion and healing, those two things. So just while we're observing, in Matthew 9, if you look, for example, just in the immediate context before what we read, what do you see? In Matthew 9:18 and following, he's in the synagogue, and this official, and my daughter has just died, so on, so on, this type of thing. And a woman who had been suffering from a hemorrhage for 12 years came up behind him, touched the fringe of his cloak. For she was saying to herself, if only I could touch his garment, I'm going to get well. And daughter, take courage, your faith has made you well. So here's a healing here. And then if you look, for example, verse 32, just a few verses for what we're doing. As they were going out, a mute, demon-possessed man was brought to him after a demon was cast out of him. So you see these two categories, right? And you're going to see this all the time, these two categories, right? So Matthew is not using the terms per se, exousias and dunamis, right? He's not using those, but I'm sure I could find them in there somewhere, because I'm going to find them, for example, in Matthew 28:18, all exousias, all authority, right? He's going to hint to that. But if you look, for example, Luke then is going to be more explicit. Luke, because why is Luke going to be more explicit? Because he's going to tie it into Pentecost and post-Pentecost. He's going to be much more explicit. He's going to make a paradigm out of it. But here, Luke chapter 9, and he called the 12 together, and he gave them what? Dunamis and exousias. He just goes ahead and says it, right? Because, I don't even need that, basically. Because in Matthew chapter 10 and verse 1, Jesus summoned, this sounds like Luke in chapter 9. Jesus summoned the 12, and he gave them what? Exousias, over unclean spirits, to cast them out and to then heal. So you get the idea of heal there, but he doesn't use dunamis. But you come to Luke chapter 9 and verse 1, you have both words mentioned there. So what do we have here is just the dynamic of these two words both being involved. And so in the charge given to the disciples is at the end of Matthew, as I mentioned a moment ago, just prior to his ascension, Jesus commands them to make disciples, right? So this is the command. Make disciples of all ethne, which is of all, sometimes translated nations, but it's peoples, ethnic people groups, basing this on the authority or exousia vested in him by the Father. That's Matthew 28:18-20. Yet this authority, this exousia, has this semantic range, or if we want to say, what does that mean anyway? If you were to draw a circle and put exousia, or authority in English, over the top of it, how many words could you pack into it that would give it its fullest meaning? That's what we mean when we say semantic range. And so one word would be the idea of jurisdiction. Now that really helps us understand more fully what he means here. In other words, Jesus was framing his commission to the disciples within the context of contested ministry. So how do we substantiate that? You keep going, right, as we did a moment ago, farther. Okay, guys, off you go. Off where we go. And he tells them, don't acquire gold or silver, all this stuff. And, you go out. And so they're about this demon expulsion and healing and preaching and everything that Jesus was doing, you can see replicated as they're going out to the towns and cities, right? But then he says what? I send you out, ego apostello. I send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. Remember this one? So he's telling them ahead of time that this is going to be contested ministry. If only it was just, everyone, this is just going to be, wonderful, But it's contested. Sheep. Now, that's important. Why? Again with the sheep. So, now this is pretty good right here. Within the same context, you go back a few verses, once seen by Jesus as defenseless sheep, ravaged by wolves, lying helplessly, hopelessly in peril, their lives ebbing away, that's verse 36, these very same fallen sheep, now committed disciples, are sent back to the wolves, but with the protection of his jurisdiction and empowerment. I think it's an amazing thing, right? Because that's us. We were those sheep at one time. Just a bloodied mess. Who was going to help us? Who was going to save us? And yet he came along and breathed life back into us and then turned around and sent us to the wolves. And yet, this is the interesting part. The wolves have no power over us anymore. Although they can make us feel like they do, right? I mean, this is the thing. So we can go out there in the world as light bearers and feel intimidated. We can be actually persecuted. We can actually be physically injured, or like Paul, we could be physically confined. We could experience all of that. But nothing happens to us without the Lord's permission. Nothing happens to us outside of his purpose. They can do nothing to annul or destroy the purpose that his commission has set upon us. Our duty is simply to lighten those dark places, right? So this is the idea about jurisdiction. And we'll see in a moment what this notion of boldness means. Boldness, and what that word really means. But so his jurisdiction authorized the field of service and souls to whom they would perform ministry, proclaiming his message, utilizing his methods, and appropriating his means through the Spirit that would be given to them, thus the empowering. And so what John said at the Feast of Tabernacles, or when John commented, and Jesus said, those that would drink should come to him. Those who are thirsty should come to him and drink, for out of his innermost being would flow rivers of living water. And then John adds, this is with reference to his Spirit, which had not yet been given, but it would be given. And so on. And then Jesus would speak about the Spirit in terms of his disciples doing greater works than he did, and things of this nature through the Spirit that would come, and so on. And then in Luke 24:49, the disciples are commanded by Jesus to wait until they've received empowering from on high, the Spirit that Jesus himself would pour out, that's Acts 2:33, upon them, that's Acts 1:8, in fulfillment of Joel's prophecy, Joel 2:28-32, as testified by Peter on the day of Pentecost. That's Peter speaking, Acts 2:16-21. So this combination of authority, that is jurisdiction over territory, and those who reside therein. So place and people, always place and people, and the commensurate power to exercise all duties within that jurisdiction comports with the authority power pattern of Jesus's ministry. For example, staying within Luke, Luke 5:24, it says, but so that you know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins. So this is Jesus saying of himself, I have authority, right? And then in chapter 6 and verse 19, and all people were trying to touch him, for power was coming from him and healing them all. You see how Jesus is always referring to those two things all the time. Power and authority, power and authority, power and authority. Now, this was also demonstrated in the ministry of the 12 and the 72. You see that in Luke chapter 9 and verse 1. And also, you say, well, that was the 12. Well, what about the 72 that went out? Because you see in Luke chapter 10 and verse 8, or Luke chapter 10, and verse 19, behold, I have given you authority to tread on serpents, scorpions, over all the power of the enemy, and nothing will injure you. But do not rejoice that the spirits are subject to you, but rejoice that your names are recorded in heaven. We see the same pattern granted to them as well. And then the post-Pentecost, same word and deed mission of the church through the apostles and others. You could trace that from Acts 1:8, 2:4, 2:43, 3:1 through 10 with Peter and John at the temple, and Stephen in Acts chapter 6 and verse 8 and so on. So we note, for example, the expectation of this familiar pattern, for example, established by Jesus, that of proclamation, promotion, let's say word and deed, declaration, demonstration, word and deed ministry in Acts chapter 4 and verse 29. Interesting account there of what's going on. So, in other words, Pentecost on, the message, mission, manner, and means remain intact. Jesus has ascended, but another of the same rank and kind has come. This is John 14:16. I'll send another comforter. So what changes? Only the matter of materialized versus spiritual manner of Jesus directing his disciples as they advance as light bearers to the end of the earth. So we're describing spirit-empowered ambassadors who bear witness to the Messiah through word and deed ministry. So you notice here in Acts chapter 4, 29 and 30, where now it says, and now, Lord, take note of their threats and grant that your bondservants may speak your word with all confidence or boldness, while you extend your hand to heal, and signs and wonders take place through the name of your holy servant Jesus. And you say, well, why? What world's all this about? When Peter and John, of course, have been doing this very thing that accompanies the proclamation of the gospel. And so now these others or other disciples are praying for the very same thing manifested through them and through their ministry. And so what's all going on there? And we see as well, just to before I answer that, to link this on with 2 Corinthians 5 and verse 20. 2 Corinthians 5:20, therefore we are ambassadors for Christ, as though God were making an appeal through us. We are ambassadors. So, what's going on here? That's an interesting verse, by the way. 5:20. Because that's not a noun, by the way, ambassadors. That's a verb. That is one strange way to put it. You know what that says? For we ambassador. If you want to check that, Bruce, sometime, just take a look at that in the Greek. For we ambassador. It is one weird construction. We ambassador. Who would translate it that way? So I looked at that and I said, well, I'd like to see a plural noun there somewhere, but it's not. It's a verb. So we ambassador. And that so ties in with like Acts chapter 1. So you are my witnesses. In other words, there's something about me and my life and how the Spirit manifests something through me and that's what's going on here. In other words, if you translate that, just translate the verse and be done with it, but just translate it and you'll get it. So we ambassador, and then huper, on his behalf. So we're a living representation of him. And the word ambassador there, presbyteros, we would take the noun form if we're talking about elders. That's what it is. But it's really a way to say that you are an authorized agent of someone. But it's a term of like respect and dignity, something like that. In this case, importance. Like, wow, you've got an important position because you are representing this important individual. You are putting him on display. You are standing in for him. This kind of thing. So what in the world does that have to do with? Going back to Acts 4:20, and these guys saying, listen, what's going on with them? Let that happen with us. Why? Because when Peter and John, they're the healing of this guy, and then they go, remember, they're brought up and, hey, give an account for that. And they do. Remember in 4:13, it says that they recognized them, that they had been with Jesus. And it was their boldness, parousia. And all these places where you say parousia, their boldness. And so I got thinking about that. I got looking up that and say parousia. But boldness, you're thinking how loud, or in your face, but that's not what it is. It's how clear, I'll say, put a fine point on that. Or sometimes if I'm in negotiations with somebody or I'm talking to somebody, I'm like, not quite getting it. Not quite getting it. You got to fine tune it. You got to bring it into focus. Put a finer point on that. Make it clearer. And you know how when everything clicks, then you're going, aha, now I get it. And this is the idea with the gospel and making it clear and so listen, when you present that image of Christ as a witness and someone gets it, wow, then the full implications of that message comes through, and they're either going to respond in accepting it, or they are going to, I don't know, maybe there's permutations and middle grounds all over the place, but this is why you'll be opposed and rejected somewhere in there. But this idea of parousia means that light is going to hit them square in the eye. They get the message. And so you have to say, what kind of message is my life sending anyway? Philippians 2:15, we're to shine as lights in the world. And Jesus said, let your light so shine, and a city set on a hillside can't be hid. So our lives are to be like billboards. That just messaging Jesus to the world. We're like social media platforms, is what we are. We're like living social media platforms. Let's say this is our message. This is why this social media platform exists. So we're constantly making posts. We're looking for constantly making posts to promote our brand. Boom, 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 boom. We live to promote our brand like this, as much as we can't stand social media sometimes, but it's a fitting analogy for who we are, this kind of thing. So the greater your willingness to represent Jesus authentically, not merely facts about him or doctrine explaining Jesus, but the essence of his life, his person, his love for sinners, his purity and compassion, his forgiving heart, the compelling manner in which he attracted others to himself, the greater your capacity to fulfill the high calling the Spirit longs to fulfill us. This will happen, and this is what comes prepackaged with the new birth, and this is what incarnational ministry is. 2 Corinthians, just to finish with this, but 2 Corinthians 3, 1 through 18, this is basically Paul contrasting two covenants, the old and the new, and saying, well, one's transitory and one's permanent, and the transitory, like the radiance of the glory of his face that would fade, with the permanent work of the Spirit, And the key word here is permanent. And therefore, we have to look in the text here for what we have then. What do we have then by virtue of the Spirit? And in 2 Corinthians 3:12, it says, therefore, having such a hope, we use great boldness in our speech. And again, we have this word boldness. This clarity. And this idea that the Spirit has delivered new life, a permanent condition. This life involves the Spirit's ongoing and permanent influences. Verse 18. He's changed this. So verse 18 simply says that that's a permanent condition. He's continually providing these influences in our life because we have something constantly. So the believer radiates, models, protrudes, exemplifies, manifests, proclaims, testifies, evinces, and otherwise expresses the influence of Jesus upon their life. That's the essence of incarnational living. Well, we'll leave it there. Do one other thing, but it's getting late, but I'll leave it there. Lord, thank you for your word today. Thank you for your willingness to do what we've described, and to do so through these, as you've put it in your word, earthen vessels and these vessels of clay. We humbly just acknowledge our need of you. We humbly acknowledge that we must rely on your Spirit, as ignorant as we are often of how you desire to work in us, but that you do and are pleased to work in us. We're most grateful. So we just pray, little by little, we can just grasp the sense of ourselves stepping aside and seeing more of your influences taking hold and using us, blessing us with the ability to just radiate and shine in these dark places. But there are many of them in these days. for each of us as we just go about our, what we would say normal lives and busy lives. Just continue to use us, Lord, and just be with us mentally, spiritually, physically, emotionally, all these things as we just go throughout our week, our day. Grant unto us the physical strength, the spiritual stamina to just wage war so often in a difficult world, just to stand strong, to be encouraged, to pray for each other, and to see you at work in so many ways that we know that you are, helping us, strengthening us, and giving us opportunity to be a blessing to you in return. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.